Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
State Representative Shannon Zimmerman of River Falls is a Republican seeking re-election in the 30th Assembly District. Shannon, welcome back to WisconsinEye.
Steve, it is always a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Okay, you're on the Joint Finance Committee. We got a report from Fiscal Bureau last week, said that we're in decent shape. Tax collections in last fiscal year, ended June 30, were up about 1%, but everybody's worried about the pandemic's effect on this fiscal year, which ends next June 30. Scenario, if we're $1 billion short, how would you respond? Raise taxes, cut spending?
Hands down, cut spending. And as a member of Joint Finance in my first tour on Joint Finance, I can tell you that it is unbelievably eye-opening when you start to really dig into the state budget. You understand really Wisconsin so much better. I mean, just as we do in our home budgets and our checkbooks, follow the money trail and we can develop patterns and identify areas of opportunity. There absolutely are areas of opportunity within our state budget to save money. So first of all, coming into an awful pandemic, which creates very challenging economic times, albeit Wisconsin certainly came into this probably in as good a financial shape as we could have. That was wonderful. I believe firmly that the answer is not to go to our families who are in some cases still struggling, maybe starting to come out of the more difficult period, and then raise taxes on them. That's not the answer. The answer is to reduce spending.
Okay, let's stay on the pandemic. Some State Senate Republicans wanted to come back to the Capitol and repeal the governor's statewide mask edict. Where are you on that mask edict, Shannon?
So first of all, as we ultimately decided, look, I think that local control is the way to go. I struggle at times, I've referenced the Wisconsin Hospital Association, the Department of Health statistics in terms of some of the hot spots, if you will, across the state of Wisconsin. And the challenge is that if you take, and I know this is, again, seeming a little bit repetitive, if you take the one-size-fits-all approach statewide, you're undoubtedly going to create undue harm. I mean, think about Pierce County, St. Croix County, northern counties that maybe have sparsity of population, not really a dense population, that are not necessarily seeing the numbers in any way, shape, or form. If we just naturally impose, I'll say, rules and restrictions across the state in a variety of forms, it could be detrimental to some of those areas. So my preference is allow for local control, but also I've said this a number of times on this subject, please let's have data drive the decision in each of these respective areas.
Well, let's stay on the pandemic. You mentioned the Hospital Association. They're on the front lines, Wisconsin and nationally, of treating COVID-19. You're reelected. You're back on finance. On the next state budget, do hospitals deserve an even greater priority than they may have gotten in the current one?
Yeah, well, first of all, healthcare in general deserves a priority. And that's a big, complex subject. We could spend probably an hour just talking about ways that we can create efficiencies in healthcare. But your question maybe is a little bit higher level. Yes, I believe that we need to look very carefully at ways that we can ensure that our great residents, our great neighbors in the state of Wisconsin are properly taken care of, and they are able to access the medical needs that they may have, especially as, and here again, I'm always going to be a bit optimistic here, as we continue our path out of maybe the darkest days of COVID.
Okay. You've started several small businesses. Senator Kapping last week, introduced this bill. If a business or an organization has complied with COVID-19 protocols to protect its patients, customers, or employees, they should not be sued for COVID. Do we need that law?
We do need that law. Now, my preference is it would be taken up federally. I think that certain things like this maybe should be, but if it's not done there, look, I spoke with countless Hudson, and River Falls businesses, Roberts business owners that are struggling as it is. And being an entrepreneur, as you indicated, right, it's not easy. And I'm not suggesting that anybody's job in life maybe is, but it is challenging enough when you're writing your name on the front of that check, and there's enough things to deal with. And then sadly, we live in an era and a world where, people are so litigation happy these days. I think the last thing we can do to businesses that are currently still recovering or maybe still feeling the adverse effects of COVID is to now have them lined up with a series of lawsuits. So if they're doing the right things, I mean, they should be protected in those situations.
You've been in the legislature a while. You've seen the states around Wisconsin legalize medical and recreational marijuana.
Yeah.
What's your position on that?
So I have maintained a position over time that has been very consistent, and that is, first of all, medical marijuana, in my opinion, it would be certainly acceptable to legalize that, because how can if prescribed by a physician, how can marijuana be treated any differently than other types of chemical substances that may be provided? So it's under the watchful eye of a physician, it's prescribed by a physician, and managed and controlled. So I think that there's a variety of examples. There's some folks locally who are strong advocates in this category, and I take time, every probably 3 to 4 months, we get together and have a coffee, and we talk through some of these areas and these issues and opportunities for that matter. Now, on the recreational side, I had conversations. I deliberately reached out to legislators in Washington State and in Colorado. And I asked them, give me the good, bad, and the ugly as it relates to the recreational side of this. And there was a fairly consistent response, Steve, in that they said, look, yes, you may see an immediate lift in state revenues. That's the good thing, right? We all, want to make sure that we're lessening the burden, not to grow government, but to actually lessen the tax burden on our neighbors. But they then followed it by saying that there were challenges that also came. But most specifically, the pattern that I found is that when a state, and it's a little different in the question you asked, when a state legalizes it and the states surrounding it do not, they see this kind of mass convergence of people into the state. So I think that's something that we need to be watchful for, which is why this should be considered and taken up at the federal level and maybe not necessarily piece by piece across the nation.
The debate over policing reforms, Governor Evers and Democrats wanted people like you in the Capitol last week to vote on his 9 bills. Now the Speaker's going to form a task force, and Senator Weingart has his own ideas. What, if any, policing reforms do you think are necessary?
So, first of all, both before and after many of the events nationally, and even for me, somewhat locally and regionally here in the Twin Cities, I represent a suburban district that, one could argue is truly that, a suburb of Minneapolis, St. Paul. So we had a front row seat here to some of the challenges that they faced. And I will tell you, neighbors here, they were a little nervous. We don't want those challenges here per se. But let me begin by our local law enforcement. They're exceptional. They are absolutely exceptional. I have the privilege of doing ride-alongs, and I probably annoy the officer I'm with at times because I ask so many questions about their job, what works for them, what challenges do they face. So when we see things that are disturbing, that are emotional to us, that energize us, there is a natural reaction to want to move immediately. I'm probably no different. But we also have to have the discipline to say, this is a complex subject. It's a subject that does require a lot of stakeholders at the table. So I said this before when the Twin City News came over to interview me, I'd rather see it done right than fast. So I do support the Speaker's request to bring together a task force. I understand a lot of efforts are well underway. If anybody had the perfect answer, they would have already delivered it. So I think for Wisconsin, we have great law enforcement. They're doing an exceptional job. They're running in doors, Steve, that we're running out of. And I never want to lose sight of that. They should probably be paid more. We should be providing more resources to them. I mean, they're seeing things in the course of their 8-hour workday that we're just not. And we need to recognize the strains and the stresses that can create while they're protecting our homes and our families.
The debate in the Capitol over who should draw the next congressional and legislative district lines. The governor says the governor's People's Maps Commission forwarded to the legislature.
Yep.
Constitution says party in power. Where are you on that question?
So the most representative body in the state of Wisconsin is the legislature, right? I mean, we are elected by those all across the state. And, you know, I made this comment in a radio show earlier this week. When I first joined the legislature, I didn't know gerrymandering was the thing. I mean, I've just been a business owner in the shadows of St. Croix County for the past 25 years doing my thing, if you will, and never really appreciated maybe that was even an issue. However, I would learn that it is an issue. It can be an issue in various states and maybe across the nation. So I think the simple answer, when you ask someone, do you want fair maps? Everybody's going to say yes. It's the obvious answer. It's in the how we get there that I think everybody gets tripped up. Is there really such a thing as a nonpartisan committee or group that can be formed? Maybe. But I'll also tell you, I have sat within feet of a lot of nonpartisan folks in the Capitol that I assure you, they're partisan. And so if they are appointed and they cannot, you know, they don't come up for election every 2 or 4 years, you run into that issue. There's a couple points. When I first dug into this and did my research, I was kind of amazed, right? So in 2018, Tammy Baldwin wins 20 of the assembly districts that went to Republicans. How could that be? Well, it's candidate. In those districts, they chose Tammy Baldwin as their preferred candidate in those particular districts. If you look at a heat chart, if you will, of blue and red, if that's the way you're going to do it, there are concentrations in urban areas of Democrats. And finally, the Milwaukee Journal, I later uncovered this, the Milwaukee Journal, and I think it was December of 18, actually came out and said that Republicans just have a natural edge in the legislature because of their geographic proximity, how they're scattered across the state. So I'm all for the people electing those in office. But the how we're going to do that is, I think, the tricky question that's going to require a little bit more than the appointment of just a nonpartisan committee.
Let's talk about property taxes. They're higher in Wisconsin than your neighboring state, Minnesota. Yeah. You said you represent a suburban district, which is why schools and local governments have been living with caps and limits for more than 20 years. So you're reelected, you're back on finance, you're voting on the next state budget. Keep those caps and limits in place on property tax levies?
We do need to keep the caps in place because local governments could potentially, you could have a lot of issues there with people seeing kind of runaway tax increases and so forth. However, there's another side to this. I also, as a member of finance, believe that we have to find more effective ways of these shared revenues making their way back to our municipalities. You know, I spent time with city administrators in River Falls, in Hudson, in my community, and there's just not enough of our money, if you will, coming back to our dynamic, high growth area of the state, and they need that. Finally, I'll close with this piece on the subject. If I have my way and if I am reelected and supported, myself and a handful of my colleagues have some very creative ideas on educational funding reform, which actually will have a profoundly positive effect on property taxes in the state of Wisconsin. Our neighbors in Iowa have developed a very bipartisan, fairly creative way that they do this, of which I'm fairly impressed. So, you know, I want to make the answer to limit government, reduce taxes, and find new and creative ways to fund the critical things like education, the critical things like, you know, our infrastructure in our local municipalities, without having to go back to the taxpayer for more money.
This is fascinating. I want to pursue this because here's my question. Is it time to give local governments alternative sources of revenue? You're aware that Representative Goyke is pushing a bill that would let Milwaukee County levy a half-cent sales tax. Representative Mako says, let's potentially expand our 5% sales tax to now exempt products and services and give that to local government. Yep. Do we need to give local governments new alternative sources of revenue so they're not so reliant on the property tax?
I think we have to use new tactics, period. Both of those representatives, both those gentlemen, I have huge and profound respect for. They're great guys, and while may have different letters after their title, believe me, I know sincerely that they care about this. I think we do need to be creative, and I'm going to tell you where it starts. It starts with if Raising taxes in any way, shape, or form has to be the last answer. The first thing we do it in our homes. The first thing we do is we look for expenditures to reduce, ways to optimize. We do this in business. Why would we not do it in government? And so once we've exhausted those things, and believe me, I assure you there are many, many things that we can do there, then we look at new and alternative models. So for example, I'm going to refer to the model that I'm socializing behind the scenes with some of my colleagues. There are ways that you can derive tax from people coming in who visit in our state that could help restructure the way our educational system is funded and provide offset to property taxes. Here again, this is something that Iowa did. Whether that model works exactly here in Wisconsin or some variation of it, I want to explore it, because if we keep doing the same thing we've always done and expect a different result, well, as we all know, that's the definition of insanity.
As you know, Governor Evers called for an increase in the gas tax, 30.9 cents per gallon, to stabilize highway and bridge funding last year. Doesn't sound to me like you're in a position to consider voting to raise the gas tax. No,
I mean, think about this for a minute right now. I'll start with, all of our great Wisconsin state residents. That's a substantial gas tax increase. That is going to hit their home budgets. These are budgets that are already wounded from the period of time that we are currently operating in. Once again, the last thing I'm going to do is say, hey, let's go add more financial burden to you folks. Not to mention now our businesses and so forth across the state. This is not something that I would support. I think there's alternative ways, and raising the gas tax should not be one of them.
When a school district or local government wants to do a major public works project, should they have to give a preference to Wisconsin businesses? There was a study that said in 2015, out-of-state contractors got $72 million in public works contracts, and that increased to $146 million in 2018. Should local governments have to give a preference to Wisconsin businesses?
So I was born and raised in this fantastic state. I've spent my entire life here in Wisconsin, and I am as Wisconsin proud as probably anybody is. So my answer to you is this, and this is both balancing in my pride for my great state, but also the 25 years I have spent running a business in this state. Where all things are equal, Steve, yes, preference should be given to the Wisconsin company. The buyer should have the right to determine who's going to offer the best service at the best price, because in the case where, sadly, I hope it's not an outside of state company, but if it is, that Wisconsin buyer is making that decision, and they're on the hook for the deliverable, they're on the hook for the performance, and they're on the hook to the taxpayer whose money they're spending. I've said this many times, there is nobody better to spend, your hard-earned money than you. So when government is making decisions to spend that, they should do so just as you would do in your home budget. But where things are equal, Steve, absolutely, Wisconsin then would have preference.
Last question, differences between you and your opponent on November 3.
I'm not going to speak to the contrast, I guess, if you will. Instead, I'm just going to speak to why I think I'm the right candidate. My strengths. First of all, I am connected in so many ways. My family is connected in so many ways in this community, starting multiple businesses here, recognized in St. Croix County a few years ago as the largest large business of the year. My wife's on a variety of boards. My sons, their families all live and work here. We coach football here. That dials me into the community. I really have an appreciation for what's happening in my backyard. And so that's number one. Number two, we are the high growth, dynamic frontier for Wisconsin. That is balancing in a variety of complexities that, as, if you will, a scrappy entrepreneur, I've had to live my whole life. So in my humble opinion, I believe I'm the right person to continue to represent Hudson and River Falls as we move forward. My roots in the local university and schools are also very, very strong. So as I seek to pursue the mission of fusing together our great schools and our local businesses so that our families in our area are well supported, that's what makes me right for the job. So my contrast is more, these are the strengths and why to choose me.
State Representative Shannon Zimmerman of River Falls is a Republican seeking re-election in the 30th Assembly District. The election is November 3. Shannon, thanks for talking to WisconsinEye.
Thank you very much, Steve. Appreciate it.
Take care. Thank you.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.